Hello, this is Calling Scotland and I'm Joe Murray. We did say at the outset we'd like to bring you, as well as Scottish politics, some music and the arts. In this case today, it'll be the literary arts. I'm introducing to you today Norman Bissell. Formerly, in another life, he was a principal teacher. He was an officer in the EIS union, and he was one of the founders of Scottish Geopoetics, which I'll get Norman on at some point to talk about geopoetics. It's an organisation I was involved in the early days myself. Norman is a writer, an essayist, a poet, novelist, and he's recently had his latest novel published called Barnhill. Now this is based on the life of George Orwell when he lived in Jura and he was writing 1984. Now the section that Norrie is reading from, the reading was about 40 minutes. But I'm going to play you it's a little film of 10 or so minutes of a section of the book that generated quite a lot of interest in the media in Scotland. So if it's interest to them, it's probably of interest to you as well. He's a very good reader and a very good writer, so I hope you enjoy the next 10 minutes or so listening to Norman reading from his book, Barnhill.
The big house, farmhouse, Barnhill. And this next extract takes us on to Barnhill itself, where he went in May 1946. And he went on his own at first, but within a week his sister Avril, younger sister, joined him there, and she virtually took control over the house. And when George brought his housekeeper Susan Watson and his son Richard there, she made it clear to Susan that she wanted to be in charge of Barnhill and the main support to George. And she also brought, a bit later on, her boyfriend came to Barnhill, David Holbrook, and you'll find out a bit more about David Holbrook in a minute. And then also along came Paul Potts, no relation to the man from Cambodia, pleased to say. He was a sort of poor poet. He had lived a long time in Canada, and he was, he had very little money. He used to sell his poems round the Soho pubs. That's how he earned his living. So you can see those first months of that summer of 1946, Orwell got very little written. So all these people were there, and he had the house to prepare, and also his garden, and he set out a vegetable garden that very first week they arrived, and tried to be self-sufficient on Jura. So this scene is between Paul Potts and George Orwell at Barnhill itself on Jura. Paul stormed out in a rage, grabbing his coat as he went. George took his coat off the back of the door and followed him. The rain had become a light drizzle as they set off walking towards the north of the island. Going up the hill, George found it hard to keep up and had to ask him to stop so he could get his breath back. "I've deliberately burnt my manuscript," Paul blustered. "How would you feel if it was one of yours?" "I'd be angry too," George puffed, "but I can't believe she knew what she was doing. It could have been Susan, and she certainly wouldn't have meant to either. You would stick up for your sister, wouldn't you?" "Not always. She can be rather a pain at times." George had recovered and noticed a buzzard circling above them on its way south towards Barnhill. He also spotted David Holbrook, who appeared to be following them from a distance. "Don't look now, but we're being followed." He made it sound like a conspiracy. I made some inquiries about David. He's a card-carrying member of the Communist Party." "You don't say." "Well, I smell a rat. Stalin murdered Trotsky in Mexico by infiltrating an agent into his house who was the boyfriend of one of his supporters. One day, as the old man was writing at his desk, he crept up behind him and smashed his skull with an ice axe. George illustrated the action with his arm. That got Paul's attention. And you know what? Trotsky was writing a biography of Stalin at the time. Maybe that's why David's here. The Stalinists hate Animal Farm with a vengeance, and they may have heard I'm writing a new book which could damage them even more. I can't believe you're serious. I'm deadly serious. He turned away so that David couldn't see him and showed Paul the Luger pistol stuck inside his belt under his shirt. I got this from Rodney Phillips after I gave Hemingway back his Colt. You never know when you'll get a bullet in the back of the neck. Paul shook his head in disbelief. Don't you think you're being a bit paranoid, George? No, I don't. I saw a lot of things that the Stalinists did in Spain that I'd never have believed. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if MI5 have got files on both of us. What, a penniless poet like me? Why would they want to know what I'm up to? Well, they tap the phones and open the mail of anyone who has any connection with the Communist Party. And after all, that Stalinist McDermott did write an introduction to your poetry book. But that was poetry, not politics. And anyway, I'm more of an anarchist. You think MI5 make any distinction between anarchists and communists? Everything's political as far as they're concerned. George knew he sounded paranoid to a political novice like Paul, but he thought, one day it will come out. Some of his best friends like Astor and Muggeridge had been spies during the war. Perhaps Freddie Ayer, whom he'd met in Paris, wasn't just there in pursuit of language, truth and logic. And who knew whether any of them still had some connection with the secret services? So there's a political George Orwell you're hearing there. That caused quite a bit of, that little section of the book caused quite a bit of interest in the media in Scotland when they picked up on it. And first of all, there was a big article with a Luger pistol in it in the Sunday Post. And came at last. Whoever knew that Norman Bissell would feature in the Sunday Post, along with Oor Willie and the Bruins?
First PC murder.
Well, good question. So I can die happy. You know, I've appeared in the Sunday Post. But I suppose my bigger claim to fame was this front page in the Herald back in June. I haven't quite got the date here. 13th, Thursday the 13th of June this year. And there it is on the front page, Boris looks to future. Okay, Boris Johnson looks to future. And underneath, Orwell feared Soviet agents would kill him. So, you know, he's looking to the future, I'm looking to the past and saying, there's some connection here perhaps. Maybe this editor knew a thing or two. And they had a bigger article inside why Orwell feared for his life, as he wrote 1984 on Jura. So it's this one little piece in the book took a trick, I think, and there's other stuff about the so-called paranoia of George in it. And the Sunday National asked me to write an essay, a 2,000-word essay about the book and about Orwell, and I think they made a lovely job of the cover. Of this was in 7 days there. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, the picture, the Orwell's face, the sort of rather melancholy face of Orwell, and the big brother eyes behind, and Barnhill in the foreground. So it's online if you want to have a look at that article, and you'll see it that way. So quite a bit of excitement from a political standpoint on this in the book. And of course, being a Glasgow man, I couldn't resist a chapter about Orwell in Glasgow. And I suppose as an islander, I'm on Ling now for the last 11 or more years. It was partly being an islander that took me to the story of Orwell's life on Jura, which I can see a bit of Jura from the cottage, the front door of the cottage where I live, a little bit behind Scarborough.
Well, that was Norman Bissell reading an excerpt from his book Barnhill, and is available now in all major bookshops at a cost of $12.99. So until next time, Alaba Gubra.